everyone. This is a Baker Pies, the math pie as well, session today. Um, and it's by Chef Rory White. He's from the hospitality department, and we're really, really grateful that we are collaborating. The Learning Center and the hospitality department is collaborating on this special event. Yeah, please enjoy. Here is the ingredient list of all the cool stuff. And Chef was actually telling us grams are better than cups. Can you actually elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yes. So grams is perfect because grams is they're not subjective to measuring cups. They're not subjective to the material that your measuring cups are made out of. Whether you have more porous or less porous ones. Somebody measures a cup a little differently. Some people will pack down a cup. Some people don't pack down cups. So this creates imperfections. Whereas a gram of butter is a gram of butter, no matter who measured it, who weighed it, like what scale you're using in theory. So yeah, grams are perfect. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it also I think considers the material that you're measuring, right? The flour that
Exactly.
you're measuring and things like that. Yeah, that's great. So you're basically the proportions are by volume rather than
Mm-hmm.
by measurements. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a ratio. So pie dough is genuinely a ratio. So it's a 3-2-1. So 3 parts flour, 2 parts fat, 1 part water. I've scaled down the butter here a little bit just because 2 parts fat in this recipe is just a little bit of excess. So what I use is egg yolks to balance out that richness, and that way we get a little bit less shrinkage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So should we start going?
That's great. Yeah.
All right. So the first thing we're going to do is dump our flour. So I have all my ingredients. The important part of baking is having all of your ingredients measured out and ready to go before you start. It's super, super important because, you don't want to mix things or have things started and then, oh, I forgot to measure this or I forgot to measure that. So make sure you have everything measured out at the beginning. So what we're going to do is a little bit of salt into our dough. We're going to mix our sugar in. So when you're mixing flour, you can mix flour as much as you want beforehand before you start developing what's called gluten. So you're not going to develop any structure in the flour. And I'm just going to, I have a camera set up and I'm just going to turn it down so you guys can actually see what I'm doing. There we go. Perfect. So in this bowl, I'm going to mix my flour, my sugar, my salt. The next thing I'm going to do, really, really cold butter. So this butter was in the fridge before. I'm just going to put it on a box grater, a cheese grater, and grate it in. If you have a food processor, this can be done in the food processor. But, if you don't, it's super easy to do it this way. Some people will cut their butter into squares. I just find it mixes in a little easier if you do it on a box grater. But you really want this butter cold. That's sort of the trick to it. And if you find your butter starting to warm up a bit, what you can do is just toss it in a bit of the flour, and that'll help you be able to get a bit of a grip on it to get it through.
And I have a question. So this butter, you're saying that it should be really cold, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we are measuring it by volume, as you mentioned in the ingredient list, we are also doing that with cold butter, right? And that would change if I'm doing it with, say, room temperature butter.
It won't necessarily change if you're doing it with room temperature butter. Just if you're doing it with room temperature butter, it'll melt. I find it's easier to work with because you want to make your dough without having your butter melt.
Mm.
Because what's going to give you that flakiness in a pie is when your butter starts to evaporate, it's going to create steam, and that's what's going to create the layers.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So the reason you use cold butter is just because while you're mixing your dough, you can kind of leave it into pieces, and also you're gonna make it a lot more worked in. It's gonna be a lot less pronounced, so you'll have a more sort of homogenized dough. Whereas like with this, And I'm going to show you guys, I'll show you the finished process in a second here, but you're going to see chunks of butter actually in it. So we're just going to distribute our butter. We're not trying to heat it up too much, but nicely mixed in there. Some people say the size of a pea. That's why I find that sort of the flake or the using the grater works really well, because once it all sort of comes together, the butter's at the right sort of size.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to add my egg yolks. So I have 3 egg yolks here separated out. And I'm going to just add those in just on top. So once I start to hydrate my dough with the water, so this is ice water. So I don't have it measured out per se, because I'm going to eyeball the hydration. I roughly know where 200 grams of it is, but I want this really, really, really cold. So I'm just going to add my there. I don't want to put too much. I don't want to put ice in it if I can avoid it. But now I'm just going to mix my dough. And you should start to see it sort of coming together. I've added about 150, and I can just see that because I have a liter container, and I know that I've added about 150 milliliters. So that dough is really starting to come together nicely. Here we go. All right.
So, Chef, if despite measuring the water, like, are we still looking at, because sometimes the room temperature also affects the dough, is that like, would that change the amount of water that you use while you're
so you just want to keep everything cold. The trick to the pie dough is if you keep everything cold, because you want that flaky sort of crust. And I'll show you in a second here what I mean. This dough is starting to come together, so I don't want to push it too far. That looks really, really good. Just like that. So my dough is now together. Okay. So one of the things that I like to do with pie dough, flip that off for a second. One of the things I like to do with pie dough is I like to put a fold into it, just to get some more of that flakiness to it. So you don't want to work this dough too much, because what we're doing if we start working it is we've activated our gluten. We don't want to build too much structure in it, but we want to add a little fold into it to get some layers. So I'm just going to roll this out, and you can see all the butter in this. Looks really, really great. Yeah, that looks really nice. And I'm just going to sort of even it off, roll it out, and we'll put a fold into this dough. And this is called a book fold. So what I'm sort of doing is folding it like a book. 1, 2, just like that. Okay. Now this is called bench flour, so I just have a little extra pastry flour, and all this is doing is sort of preventing my dough from sticking. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now I'm going to chill this dough in the fridge for about, you want to chill it anywhere from 15 minutes to kind of 35 minutes. Just lightly wrapped in cling film. You want to square off those edges. So one of the things I find too is I'll do this. So I'm going to cut a small piece for a topping, a big piece for a topper, for a base, large base. And then what I'll do now is I'll just sort of ball it up, because I find that if you start round, you can end round very easily. Whereas if you start square and try to go round, it doesn't work as well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I just find at this point, so we've activated our gluten. We want to let our dough rest, sort of let the gluten strands sort of relax a little bit. And then you can see I put a fold. Oh, my light's too lit. There's that fold. There's that layers of butter. And that's going to give you rise. So basically that butter is going to start to bake and steam, or when it starts to bake, it's going to steam and lift that pastry up a little bit, give you a little bit of rise, a little bit of flakiness. Okay. So one top, one bottom. Bottom. And then that's our 2 pies. Okay? So the dough comes together very, very quickly. All right. So now I'm just going to wrap these up really quick and throw them in the fridge. Now you want to cover these, and if you flatten them a little bit, it's a good idea. So what I've done is I've just put a little bit of parchment paper or a piece of parchment paper on top of them. And I'm just going to flatten them out a bit. That way they sort of cool quicker. And these are ready to go to the fridge. All right. Any questions so far? No.
No. It's good so far, I think. But yeah, please feel free to ask questions either in the chat or unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, this is interactive. What is your favorite pie? Emily, what's your favorite pie? I'm picking on you because your camera's on.
Apple pie. And also, yes, and that's the only type of pie I have baked in my whole life.
That's awesome. All right. How do you like to top your apple pies? I'm a crumble person. I like crumble on my pie.
Same here. Yesterday it was pie day. My little son even asked me to bake apple pie. I did it for him. He was so happy.
That's awesome. Oh, so the apple pie again. This is great. Great.
Yeah.
I always find that I like to go apple picking. I have twins. They're 2.5 years old. So apple season, I really like to go apple picking with them.
Mm-hmm. It's always fun.
But we don't love always eating all of the. They don't love apples to eat them. Mm-hmm. They like applesauce, apple, stuff like that. So I always find kind of mid-October, I'm sitting there making pie dough and pastry dough or puff pastry and stuff like that, making turnovers to use them up.
Cool. I do have
I'm the person who I get so excited about the actual act of picking apples.
Yeah.
Sorry guys, we have a delivery and our delivery horns are here. I get so excited about the act of picking apples. I always pick too many. Because you're like, oh, I need to use this, I can do that, or we'll have fresh apples every day, and then after the 3rd day, I'm like, oh man, if I never see another apple again, I'm good.
I tried for the first time apple picking. This year, it was a strange year, 2020, but this was one of the highlights, blueberry picking and apple picking. It was so great, and of course, we enjoyed apples until later.
Oh. Yeah. I love it. Berry pick I love going strawberry picking in the spring.
Oh.
There's a spot, there's a wild strawberry patch. I'm not gonna tell you where because everybody will show up but I always go and pick strawberries there. One of my favorite. That, and then up north there's a wild blueberry patch. So a couple of years ago I was out picking blueberries and a black bear had the same idea. He wanted to go pick blueberries too. So I kind of backed out and let him have his patch.
Nice.
All right. So we are going to start making our filling for our pie. For a second. Okay. So you can use a lot of different apples for pie. I like Granny Smiths because they have great structure. But you can use a lot of them. Some don't make great pies. Cortland don't make great pies. They're just a little soft. So I like Granny Smiths because you're going to add that sugar in anyway. And I like that sort of green apple mouthfeel and flavor.